Let me share a little bit of information about a meeting that I went to the other night at another local church. We discussed how things are going in our community and how we can come together as a community and solve our own problems. I shared a little bit of that earlier. And then if we need to, we can reach out to the elected officials, whether it be the rat problem, traffic problem, or issues with the police. We may even talk about elected officials and some of the problems that we're having with them if they're not working with us the way that we think that they should be. But we're not really trying to call them out. We want to work with them as much as we possibly can. I thanked a few people, Pastor Wright, for letting us have the meeting here tonight. I'd like to thank my friend Adam Reuter, who has been doing some video work for us. He's been doing a great job. Thank you, Adam. And just like to thank all of you because you do make this happen. And we have a speaker for the Can Change Baltimore County Committee, and that is Alan Robertson. And he's going to be coming up and giving a talk on the Paragon project, and he may have a few other things to share with us as well. He's a very informative speaker, and very happy to have him here this evening. Please give Alan a hand.
Thank you, Scott. I was asked to speak initially on the Paragon project, and it's confusing because it's going back and forth several different ways, and I'd like to address the larger issue that's really behind the matter. And the Paragon project started out as a PUD, but if you go way back into its history, it was a development of a quarry. So it was a use of an area that had been used up, finished, and something good was to happen there. The PUD originally was approved for a lot of homes in an area that had some businesses approved prior to that. Because of the prior approval, the PUD was allowed to use the old, antiquated environmental standards. Now, with this approval in around 2008, it was going to put in a lot of residences and businesses and be a typical PUD, but the problem with the area was the roads and the infrastructure. The communities got up in arms about it because they said, we can't handle what we have now, something has to be done. And the environmental people were concerned because it wasn't meeting the standards that were even set up 8 years prior to that. And even under those standards, our bay and our rivers were getting polluted, and specifically the Bird River was getting silted in. As this went forward, the mall businesses got involved because they were concerned about losing jobs and losing business there with this new competition. Now, part of the advantage of this new area would be to promote new jobs and give more employment and more opportunities. And they kept touting that as a great aspect of the whole project. However, did they think of what the net increase would be if they're replacing something else that's already built, already has a structure in place, already has the mechanisms for doing exactly what they were trying to do? So the three groups got together and started opposing the PUD, and eventually they got an agreement that the environmental standards were going to be improved up to the 2008 standards. The roadways were going to be enhanced so that now Route 43 would connect going east, and coming from the east would connect to Route 7. And there were some other improvements that this project was going to help out with the area. But it didn't solve the other issues, so the community and the businesses kept appealing, and they went through their due process. That's when the process got derailed. The whole thing started because of the new process called amendments to the PUD laws. This is a shortcut process. The PUDs themselves are a shortcut process to development. Well, once a PUD's approved, even a shorter process to changing the PUD was put in place, and it wasn't given community input, it wasn't given community notification, it simply was, here's a message going over to the council, and if they didn't respond within a couple weeks, it was automatically approved. How ridiculous of a process is that, when it impacted so many different areas and so many people were involved? Well, as the appeal went forward, the project got delayed, and suddenly we had a change to the laws. They came out with another type of legislation that generally described this property, made it sound like it belonged to a lot of areas for it to be along the I-95 corridor, and passed legislation that would allow the kind of development by right on the property. Now, what is the significance of that? That usurped the due process. All the time and effort and energy and input that all these people had put together just went right out the window. Well, that's also called spot zoning, which isn't allowed in Baltimore County. We say it's not allowed, but it's been going on for years. So it's not supposed to be allowed in Baltimore County. And that's what brings up the larger issue. But before I move on to the larger issue, there's been some new information that first, as a result of the new legislation, there was a request for dismissal of the case, followed up by an appeal by the attorneys for the Paragon project, followed up by, as of the 15th, a notice of deliberation on a motion for reconsideration. Now, I know that sounds like double talk. What they're doing is they had made a decision, and as a result of these requests, they were going to reconsider their decision, and usually that means a reversal. And then that's followed up by, as of a month ago, as of right now, on September the 18th, there is a petition for judicial review. And I'm sure that is going to be followed up by yet another motion for dismissal once that information gets out. So it just muddles the whole process and is very confusing, and it all started with this latest legislation. And that's the larger issue. Do we legislate to allow the developers to go forward with whatever project they're interested in doing? When did it start? I'm not sure, but we can go back a long way, because PUDs themselves were legislation that allowed the developer options that wouldn't have been available. Some were good, and initially the project, as I spoke at an earlier meeting, it was good to have progress without having all the mundane procedures to try and group commercial, retail, and residential together. But then, with the amendments to the legislation and new legislation, all that went right out the window. And what's happened is we've gotten a mixed match of laws that nobody's even sure what they're saying, because every time you have an issue, you point to a law, somebody else says, oh, that's been superseded, or that's been changed, or this is an exception, or it's a variance, or it's a variation of standards. Are you getting the picture? So as we move forward, the PUDs have been misused. The amount of space that was allowed for a PUD has been reduced from close to 200 acres down to, at one point, it was 5 to 10 acres. Then they created legislation because PUDs weren't allowed outside the URDL, which is the urban-rural demarcation line. That's the area that's supposed to conserve property and be for the natural resources. And these PUDs are for intense development. Well, they've changed that, and now a prior councilman put through legislation that allowed PUDs on marina property, marina zone property, only in the Bullies Quarters area. So if you have marina property elsewhere, you couldn't do it outside the URL, you couldn't do the PUD. If you had any other property in Bowley's Quarters that wasn't marina property, you can't do a PUD. So once again, that sounds very much like spot zoning. It only affected 2 properties. And one was making a request, and it was on marina property. What the timing was amazing. That was closely followed up by another piece of legislation that allowed density on a PUD to be designated for PUDs under an acre in size. Wow, how far have we come? From a project that was supposed to be 190, 200 acres, down to projects that are less than a ½ acre in size. Why do you have a zoning problem on projects under an acre? Well, this happened at the time that the Driftwood project was being proposed to the communities, and it was on a ½ acre. Another opportunity or another specific, here's how we're going to address the zoning. That was later followed up by legislation to change the zoning for the depot. The depot is an area on Eastern Avenue at Route 43 that has been a vacant building for decades. And there was an interest in moving a Walmart to that and creating this as a destination and a hub for retail and commercial business. And through the CZMP process, which occurs in Baltimore County once every 4 years, the changes were made in the zoning to allow this to happen. Well, there were those who didn't want this to happen, and they went through the due process of appealing it, and they did that through getting a petition to put this to a referendum. That is the process that they were supposed to follow. Well, lo and behold, the council came and did their little thing again. In spite of changing it in CZMP and having everything move forward properly, they then described the property in their legislation and gave it by right the procedures and the authorization to do exactly what they wanted to do through the CCMP process. Now it didn't matter whether they got enough signatures or no matter what the referendum said. Even if the community or the people who were against it won, they'd still lose because of the zoning issue. Didn't stop there, folks. We had Route 43 that was designed for commercial use. That's why they spent all the money to put that roadway in. And there was to be a small amount of residential property. Well, when they couldn't get enough businesses there, they decided they had to expand the amount of residential, and they came to the communities and they kept relenting and relenting and relenting. And eventually they got to a project called Greenlee. It's at the crossroads of Route 43. Except even the PUD process was too cumbersome for the developer. So lo and behold, they created new legislation for the Route 43 district, the rebuilding district. And what did that one say? It said that all code, all laws regarding development and setbacks and density and all of the zoning issues can be ignored in the Route 43 corridor. Everything can be ignored. Now they have laws that say you don't have to pay attention to any laws. Well, maybe they shouldn't pay attention to that law. But are they stopping there? No, they're continuing on now with this to usurp the process at Route 43. Whether you're for the development, whether you're for the retail the outlets, or whether you're against them, the problem is, the bigger issue is, you don't have a process that you can follow. You don't have the rights, because as soon as you go to exercise your rights, they make a left turn and they cut you off. And that's the part that's not correct. And that's why there is a push for the referendum to be signed, and that's why there's a push to have this settled by votes in Baltimore County. So then you're going to see things like this come out in the mail. Caution, warning, beware, anti-competitive efforts by out-of-state developers. It's like out-of-state developers are a lesser life form than the in-state developers. I wonder, who do you think has more influence with the local politicians? The in-state developers are given a lot more money than the out-of-state developers. It would crowd schools and create apartments instead of this building. Well, if they didn't move forward with that PUD project with all the residential over the last 7 to 8 years, what makes people think they're going to move forward with it now? They were looking for another alternative and a solution for that property. It stops 1,600 new jobs and economic growth. Wow. Is this the only place things can be built? We have the government center issue down in Dundalk that they're taking away people's resources there and saying they're going to bring in businesses when they have 170 open spaces. We had Route 43 that they couldn't get businesses in on, and so they started building residential. Now that they're building residential, they say, oh, we need space to put up businesses. It depends on what the argument of the week is. Here we go again. And then they say to overturn unanimous county council approval. What a shame. Isn't it just a few weeks ago that we saw legislation approved 7-0 by Baltimore County that Kevin Kamenetz came in and vetoed? Now, any vote of 5 or more should basically be veto proof, except Kevin Kamenetz came in and said, no, this doesn't meet with the comport of the law. This isn't allowed in Baltimore County. So he vetoed what the council voted 7-0 for, and now the council could come back and override his veto, but they remain silent. So just because you have a 7-0 vote by the council doesn't mean that it's necessarily right. They have something called councilmatic courtesy. Don't try and look that up, it's not in the laws. But that seems to be more important than the laws that say review this in accordance with the procedures and with the legislation that's in force. They have laws against spot zoning. Councilmatic courtesy is more important than those laws. So now we have a tiering of importance of laws that always seem to work in favor of the developer. So let's give the voters a chance to make a decision. I don't know if they're going to make a good decision or an informed decision, but at least let's put it out there and let's get this referendum approved so that everybody can get to know the issues, and hopefully people who see this video will understand the issues more now than they did prior to this.
What Alan was sharing about how the elected officials are just doing what they want. It's amazing that some of the same old faces keep showing up in the process. So somebody that's working for the county is now, well, two people that I know of right now are actually working for a law firm that are pushing a lot of the different developments that are going on. And they had input, and actually, one of them closed the Eastwood School, helped close the Eastwood School. Now he's actually an attorney for the developer to push that agenda. At the meeting the other day, as I was referring to, Jim Smith was there, and Jim Smith was acting like, he said he loved Dundalk, and he said that he was going to do so many wonderful things here, that this project was going to be so good for our community, and how we missed an opportunity when he was the county executive to do a state-of-the-art facility at the YMCA, and that we missed our opportunity. But he wanted to make sure that we didn't miss that opportunity this time. So when he was county executive, that happened. And now he's not county executive. So what is his interest in this? Why does he want to do so much for Dundalk?
Secretary of Transportation.
He's had a lot of different jobs. To me, it's about money. It's about his friends and the money. It's not about that. He was acting like he was Santa Claus for Dundalk, that he wanted to do so many wonderful things. Well, I have to tell you, I think that he's the Grinch, and that he is going through Baltimore County, and Dundalk TV would like to just keep on following what's going on. The more that I learn about what is going on throughout Baltimore County, the more disgusted I become, and the more unbelievable it all is. So I can't believe Miss Alke's story, and I mentioned her earlier, and so thankful she had shared that. If you hadn't seen that Dundalk TV video, please see that video. Pastor Wright had shared other videos as well, and we're moving forward, I think, tremendously on the project for a group that just came together. So we're getting our email list together, and we're pulling everybody together, and I think that we'll have a very strong voice in the very near future.